Chat with Nathan Grubel, who covers the NBA and the NBA draft, does a great job breaking down prospects. Wanted to talk to him about the top of the draft board. Nathan, you're on in DC. Wiz have the number 2 pick. We're getting fired up for this week. How are you?
I'm doing well. Happy draft week. It's certainly an exciting time to be a fan of the Washington Wizards. We'll get into a few reasons why, but absolutely happy to be here.
So let's start at the top of the board before they're on the clock at number 1. How sure are we know what's going to happen at this point?
There is no being sure about what's going to happen this week, guys. Honestly, there's a lot of things up in the air, even at the top of the draft. Nobody knows quite yet what the Atlanta Hawks are going to do. I know they're trying to get Alex Sarr in for some workouts as we speak. That hasn't necessarily been reported that's happened yet. They've had a number of guys in as well as the Washington Wizards, so there isn't a lot of certainty up towards the top of the draft. But I say that we don't know exactly.
No one can know. No one gets to know because we don't know, and then the phone cut off. Like there's information that no one's allowed to know. They're listening, Grant.
He might have wanted to provide some added and extra intrigue there, right? Where he just kind of leaves us hanging, tries to determine whether or not.
It's like the bottom line is this. Question. I've heard something that no one else has ever heard. I'm going to reveal it right now.
Right. I think he's back with us. Nathan Grubel covering the NBA draft. All right, so pick up where you left off. You dropped there, but essentially nobody knows.
No, nobody knows exactly where certain guys are going, correct. But I think we do have some ranges in terms of where certain guys are projected to go. There are certain guys in play. We have Alex Sarr at the top. We've got Donovan Clingan near the top. So there's a few guys I think are more likely to go 1 and 2 as we're trying to figure this whole thing out.
All right, so let's say it is Alex Sarr. That's the name I see most mocked. I want to get back to that in a second here, Nathan. But if they do end up with Alex Sarr, what kind of player is he now? Give me some comps. Who does he project to be?
So Alex Sarr right now, 7'1", incredibly versatile defensive players who you're projecting him out to be, right? Somebody who can cover multiple positions on the perimeter, somebody who's going to be able to play in a variety of different defensive coverages, and someone whose offensive game, quite frankly, is still expanding, right? We know that he's a very face-up oriented forward/center, certainly trying to improve the jumper, tried to showcase some of that both in the G League Ignite exhibition games before last season started and then overseas in the NBL. But someone who I think a lot of his ball handling is still something to be tapped into more, along with some of the jump shooting. He doesn't quite have some of those skills that you're looking for in terms of a post-up game from a traditional big man, but how he moves, the type of athlete that he is. I mean, you're looking at someone who can compare defensively, at least on that side of the ball, more so to an Evan Mobley in Cleveland, for example, right? You see how awesome someone like that can be in your defensive scheme, as you can send him out on the perimeter. You can play him next to a traditional big. You can play him as the 5-man. And I think having that versatility in your lineup is something that every NBA team's looking to add to their front court right now.
I like the idea of a 7'5" wingspan, but also a guy who can move. There's twitch. He can flip his hips. I was watching highlights today of him defending, as you said, multiple positions, and he's kind of moving with guards, swing forwards and competent doing so. I mean, could he be an elite defender right away? Is that what we're talking about? Or am I a little too bullish there?
I caution using the word elite. However, I do think if you want to put him in the very good category out of the gate, I certainly think that's attainable for him, right? I do think he's going to be a positive defender on that side of the ball, as you were just talking about, just because of the ground that he can cover, the number of positions that he can guard. You just don't see a lot of big men come into the NBA at his size, with his fluidity, with his coordination, with his ability to cover so much ground. He has good feet. I think he's improved his hands a lot since he was playing at Overtime Elite. That was the last time that I got to see him in person down in Atlanta. The biggest thing that stood out to me there was he didn't have the best of hands in terms of catching the ball, in terms of blocking shots with either hand going either way. But I think he's improved on those things. And as you come into the NBA, you want guys who can do those things, who can cover those multiple positions. You don't want to be beat at any one given position, because if you're giving up that type of ground to the opposing team, those are the mismatches that other NBA squads are looking to execute against, especially when you get deeper in the playoffs. So I understand the Washington Wizards may be quite a ways away from going deep in the playoffs, but if you're trying to build this thing from scratch and really think about what are the types of pieces I can put in place to possibly contend one day, having a big man like Alex Sarr certainly helps get you on that road.
Nathan Grubel with us here on Grant and Danny breaking down the NBA draft in 2 days' time. So I'm trying to do, and then this front office has been whisper quiet. They are not a leaky group, right? They're doing their own thing and humming along, and I got no complaints, but it's just kind of hard to figure out their thinking here as we've kind of gone through this, Nathan. I look back to Oklahoma City as kind of my guidepost here. I wonder what you think about this. They specialized in finding the guy that doesn't look like everybody else, right? The Chet Holmgrens, the Jalen Williamses, the Josh Giddeys, the Lucas Dorts, the dudes that don't look like they'd get picked first, so to speak, but positional size and kind of having a different angle of attacking things seems to have been the track record there. I wonder who might fit that bill if it's not Sarr at number 2, because maybe Atlanta takes him at 1.
So if Alex Sarr isn't the pick at number 2, I mean, I've mocked this. I've discussed this on other shows. Stephon Castle would be my guy out of UConn. And my top 3 of my draft board, since I started creating a board that I was sharing with scouts, executives, agents behind the scenes, end of January, beginning of February, my top 3 hasn't changed in terms of the guys that compose it: Alex Sarr, Stephon Castle, and Modest Buzelis. But when you look at Stephon Castle specifically, what he proved at UConn in terms of his demeanor, his determination in winning both sides of the ball, right? He was able to fit in and mesh in a number of ways offensively, but particularly on defense. He was someone who took his matchup very seriously and stonewalled a number of guys on the perimeter, right? Guys were not able to go through him or around him very easily. Castle said, I'm not going to let you score easily over me. You're either going to have to hit a tough shot or you're going to have to pass the ball up. And when you're able to build a perimeter defense oriented around 2 guys who specialize in keeping guys in front of them and limiting penetration into the paint with a guy like Stephon Castle, and if you could pair him with Bilal Coulibaly, I mean, that's to me is incredibly enticing to really start building your team around that framework of having a defensive identity first, being able to get out and transition with plus athletes, and then you start to figure out more of the skill-oriented pieces of the game from there in terms of actually shooting the ball, which Stephon Castle, for all that he's getting knocked, that he can't quote-unquote shoot the ball, I do understand the concerns. He got a lot more comfortable with his pull-up jumper as we got later into the season. He excelled from the free throw line as we got later into the season, and then he was knocking some shooting drills at the NBA Draft Combine out of the park. And he even talked about it, which was one of the things I really like about him. He's a very self-aware player, as it seems, especially in interviews. He specifically talked about how he knows that he needs to improve his shooting, and that's going to be something that he's going to capitalize on in the offseason and in offseasons to come. So if I'm the Washington Wizards, I look at all the different ways that he can physically impact the game on both sides of the ball, and I'm confident after speaking with him and meeting with him and watching him work out that he's going to be someone who lives in the gym and is going to improve his game. I mean, he brings so many other things to the table to where if he's at least comfortable to get the shots up and to keep working on it, that's something to me that can improve more so than some of the other areas, like how physically strong he is for someone coming into the NBA, how willing he is to guard multiple positions and set screens as a guard and play make out of pick and roll situations and cut to the basket and play in transition. He just brings so much to the table from a floor perspective. He would be my guy if Alex Sarr isn't there.
Nathan Grubel, Draft Deeper on social media, Youth Movement NBA, and Draft Deeper, as he gives intel into some of the great young players getting drafted this draft cycle. You've been doing this, though. I remember going back to some of your work on Bilal Coulibaly last year. Makes me want to ask you, you just kind of got into this, but the core that they're putting together, let's say they do draft Sarr, which is most likely what's happening. And you add him to Kispert and Coulibaly and Denny Avdia, who kind of broke out last year. They're going to have Kuzma and very likely Poole still. I mean, what do you view as an identity short and long term for them if they go the Sarr route? Like, what are they trying to build, do you think?
I think the identity has to be defensive first, right? And it's having a number of guys who can cover ground, guard multiple positions, switch in different schemes, And I think, again, if you're able to build a defensive lineup where I think more opposing NBA teams are going to try to beat you from a 5-out perspective, and you have someone like an Alex Sarr who could step out and guard an opposing 5-man or a 4-man on the perimeter or switch on to different guards, and you have a guy like Bilal who can certainly cover 2s and 3s and switch on the 4s and keep those guys in front of them, and you're not losing anything from a strength and a physical matchup perspective. And you have a guy like Denny who's already proven that he's one of the best perimeter defenders and switchable defenders across the entire NBA. You're building that foundation to where you're going to play defense first, you're going to create easy opportunities in transition, and you're going to make sure that you're taking care of those easier fundamentals that you have more control over, versus we're going to become a team that's more offensive oriented right now, and we're going to start bombing shots and we're going to do some careless things offensively that aren't always going to lead back to that foundation of how can we generate the easiest shots that we possibly can, defending, getting out in transition, figuring out how to get easy shots in the paint and around the basket. Those, to me, are the things that I would want to see from a young team with athletic, long, strong wings and forwards. And I think that type of identity can really push the Wizards forward into finding some of the other skill pieces at the guard position and maybe getting another shot-making wing in the future.
So, Nathan, this draft is getting dumped on pretty good. And sometimes pundits and people that do this for a living are right. Other times when we say, oh, this draft is terrible, there's nobody any good, sometimes it takes a minute, but you get an Anthony Edwards, a Tyrese Halliburton, and a Tyrese Maxey in 2020, for example, that wasn't a particularly well-reviewed draft. I wonder if there is a story like that where we look back in a few years and go, this didn't look like much on paper, but there are a few really good players in this draft that kind of materialize, whether it's high ceiling guys or otherwise. I know you mentioned Stephon Castle, who I like too, but who are some of those guys that might end up really working out for teams down the line?
Well, I think this draft as a whole, I'm glad that you outlined that specific narrative, because it's definitely gotten a bad rap. And I'm not going to come on here and say that narrative is incorrect, that this is going to be one of the strongest draft classes we've ever seen. No, I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say is I think there's been too much pessimism around this draft, because when you evaluate these prospects, you can see a lot of strengths and what they bring to the table and do well. But when you look at their weaknesses and where those weaknesses are in elements of their game and in relation to how success is actually being found in the NBA nowadays, you can see some pretty scary floors for some of these guys, to where if you take them with a number 1, number 2, number 3 pick, and you're not able to see anywhere close to a normal return on value of that asset in comparison to other draft classes, and you see these scarier floors, I think that to me is more the pessimism that's coming around this draft class. Not that talent can't be found, because yeah, you might have to put a plan in place to develop an Alex Sarr or a Stephon Castle or a Modest Buzelis, go down the line. Nikola Topic, someone who's fallen down mocks. Ron Holland, who's fallen down mocks. Even Zachary Risachet, I'm not totally convinced that he's going to be a top 3, top 4 pick. He might be on a little bit of a slide. But if you, as a front office, have a plan in place to develop these guys and maximize their strengths, while also being able to find a role for them on the floor that plays to those strengths and gives them the minutes to start to figure out some of the pieces of their weaknesses, and you have that plan in place to bring them along slowly, and eventually you get to a point to where they are living up to expectations, versus throwing them into a role early on that they're not quite meant to play, or a role where they're not able to capitalize on what they do well. Those are the situations where it can get dicey, and that's why I think it's a lot of confusion around the media space and the public space as to what these NBA teams are going to try to do, because they're trying to formulate plans for development as much as they are trying to just draft the best player available. But those situations aside, guys, I really do think we have a number of players in this draft with floors where they can come in and contribute right away, like a Reed Shepherd, like a Dalton Knecht, Devin Carter. I'm a bigger fan of Zach Edey than some other people are, but Donovan Clingan. You have players who have strengths of size, strength, shooting, the ability to move the basketball and make quick and good decisions. There are players in this draft who will play up to an all-rookie level and will bring that excitement and that buzz, while some of these other guys with higher ceilings are still developing and trying to figure out where they fit in the NBA.
Excellent information. Really appreciate the insight, Nathan. Look forward to the draft in a couple of days and seeing what goes down for Washington. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care, guys.
Thanks, buddy.
Be good. There's Nathan Grubel covers the NBA and the NBA draft here on Grant and Danny. All signs pointing to Alex Sarr, 7'1" with a 7'5" wingspan, helps you on D sooner than he does on offense.
Certainly intriguing.
But if he turns into a piece on offense, that's where you could potentially find a star in a draft where there wasn't one.
This is that new age center, right? The days of, back to the basket, get down in the low post and bang around, those days don't exist anymore. And
Zach Edey, who he just mentioned.
precisely.
Purdue,
Yeah.
7'3".
And Edey's developed a bit of a face-up game as a nice touch, but still that's where he's going to major, right? You don't want him out there shooting jump shots. Sarr has the potential. This is a long ways away from being actualized, but to be a guy that could fit in one of those 5-out systems, aka 5 guys around the perimeter, screening, rolling, hitting step backs, and having a versatile offensive game, if he can help you right away defensively, which they certainly need, that's a bonus, and he could grow larger into that role as he kind of fills out. The comp I heard somebody really smart give is a player I like a lot out of USC. Remember Evan Mobley with the Cleveland Cavaliers? Easy for me to say, who came out a couple of years ago. Hasn't really blossomed into a star like I thought he would, but he's sort of that model, right? Where this is not a hulking, massive back to the basket guy. It's a run and jump, athletic, tall guy that can get switched on a bunch of different players. It's certainly intriguing for the way the NBA is now.